No, there's no maybe. He is as good a guest as we've ever had on the show, even back when we were in regular radio. Dave Softy Mahler, KJR Seattle, joins us. And get ready, put on your seatbelts. Paul Catalina, David Smoak. My man, are you at NFL training camp today?
I am right now at the Virginia Mason Athletic Center, home of your 2013 Super Bowl champions. Should have been 2014 as well. Seattle Seahawks. Roasting my matzo balls off on the sideline under a 84-degree Renton, Washington day on the shores of Lake Washington.
84 degrees.
84 is winter.
Come on.
It's winter.
84
right now.
and no humidity.
God, we always didn't really like you. We just like to hear you. But thanks. All right, so obviously the story of Colorado, my God, it took forever. They finally decided to cross the line in the sand. I don't think that Washington's a part of anything that will be Big 12. I don't think they want to be. But how has that – what's the reaction been, in your opinion, in the circles of the Huskies?
Well, first of all, this whole thing has been a downward spiral ever since USC and UCLA took off, right? I mean, they've lost 3 teams and they've added none. They have an expiring media contract and they have yet to announce a new one. So it's just been take, lose. There's been no addition at all to this conference, either in the form of a media deal or a new program coming on board. So the program is slowly but surely, leaking a little bit, or the conference is leaking, if you will, a little bit. They haven't repaired anything yet. There's been no, plugs to the holes in the boat, if you will. So it's been kind of a few months of just kind of misery for the Pac-12. You know, I saw Dan Lanning's comments today. I don't know if you guys saw that or not.
Yep.
The head coach at Oregon made a comment about losing Colorado and kind of laughed it off as, hey, they stink. What's the big deal? They haven't beaten anybody. Well, the big deal, dipstick, is that you lost the number 16 market in the country in Denver, Colorado. And everybody, I think, assumes that Colorado under Deion Sanders is going to be a bit of a shinier object than Colorado under Mel Tucker or Mike McIntyre or Carl Durrell, right? So Colorado might just be kind of coming into a little bit of relevance here with prime time, and they're walking away. So I thought Dan Lanning's comments were stupid and short-sighted and, frankly, idiotic and ignorant, to be honest with you. I mean, the guy's thinking like a football coach. I understand that because that's what he is, but he's not thinking like a businessman. And that really has been the problem with this conference, is that the leaders, namely the president's guys, have not thought like business people. And that's why the conference is where they're at right now.
So what do you gauge as the temperature around Washington for how they feel about the conference, short-term and long-term, and what they have to wait for when it comes to other options?
I think UW is like Oregon. They're just waiting to see if there's going to be an invite down the road from the Big Ten. I don't think they want to be a part of the Big 12, and here's why. It's got nothing to do with the quality of the programs in the Big 12. I mean, first of all, you guys know this as well as I. If they bring on Arizona, as they're rumored to be doing, this basketball conference might be second to none in the country, right? I mean, think about Kansas and Baylor and Texas Tech, who has been to the Final Four recently, as you guys know, under Chris Beard. Now you're going to bring on a storied program like Arizona. Kansas State has had their moment in the sun as well as a basketball program under Bob Huggins and beyond. So they may be kind of unmatched when it comes to basketball if they bring on Arizona. The problem for fans in Seattle, I think, is the towns and the airports are so hard to get to, and they're smaller. They're not exactly big-time hubs when it comes to airlines and hotels and things like that. I think that kind of puts a bit of a burden sometimes on fans that come from markets like Seattle and Los Angeles. So I think when it comes to the Big 12, okay, if the Pac-12 falls apart and the Big 12 is the only option, then great, sign us up. But in a perfect world, I think it's either A, stay in a new-look Pac-12 with maybe a San Diego State or an SMU or maybe a Colorado State, or just potentially play with 9 teams every season. Maybe you add one more program, or wait for an invite from the Big Ten at a reduced revenue share, meaning the Big Ten would go to UW and Oregon and say something like, hey, you guys don't have a lot of options. You've only got 8 teams left in your conference. Your conference is falling apart from the inside out. you want to stay there, or do you want to come to our conference for a 75% share? So I think that's what UW would prefer, but what they would prefer is irrelevant until they get the invitation.
Softy, am I right or wrong that a lot of presidents and ADs have spoken, but I haven't really heard much out of Washington? Is that just because they were really not so sure how this thing would end?
No, Anna Maricause, who's the president at UW, I mean, Dave, she's preoccupied with doing different things like, curing viruses and stopping hunger and poverty and homelessness and things like that, right? Things that actually matter, I guess, as opposed to football. She's not really a big sports person, if you will. I don't know how else to say that, but it's not really kind of her forte. When you look at, a guy like Michael Schill, who's now at Northwestern, he was the president at Oregon. He was more of a sports guy. Arizona State's president. I think even USC and UCLA, kind of had more invested personally in that arena than Anna Maricause does. Jen Cohen kind of tends to speak for the school when it comes to athletics. And, that's kind of part of the issue is that they have this executive committee of the Pac-12, and the executive committee is basically made up of all 12 of the presidents. And some of them are not real sports people. And I don't say that to be insulting. I say that just to paint the picture of reality, because a lot of these people are concerned with bigger things than football. They are looking at, different issues around education and, solving the world's problems and, all kinds of different things like that. So they're not really living and breathing football and basketball the way the ADs are. So I've thought for a long time that the ADs, at least a few of them, should be on the executive committee to kind of add a little bit of a dose of reality to the whole conversation. And now you're kind of seeing what happens when things like that get ignored. The conference falls apart.
Softy, do you think that, privately, I don't know, probably maybe publicly they've said this too, but like that Washington has to look at themselves as, look, they have a sterling resume when it comes to athletics. Like, that they've contended for national championships in the past. I know it's not been recent in many people's regard, but more recently than places like Minnesota or something like that. And then they look at themselves and find themselves in this spot with no answer.
Well, look, here's the thing about UW. They were in the Final Four 7 years ago. Chris Peterson had them in 3 straight New Year's Six games, obviously, in the Peach Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and then the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. Kalen DeBoer had them at 11-2 a year ago. So there is an expectation for Washington that they're going to be a contender for something bigger than just a bowl game every single year. That's the tradition, and that's the history of Washington's program. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of on the outside looking in right now and kind of waiting for everybody else to kind of dictate to them what their paths are. If they could choose tonight, I think they'd be in the Big Ten tomorrow. But they're waiting for the invitation. There's always that kind of concern that USC and UCLA do not want UW and Oregon in the Big Ten because they want to have a monopoly on the West Coast. I mean, let's face it, guys. For now, if you want to play big-time football and you don't consider the Pac-12 or Pac-10, what's left of it, to be a big-time conference, you want to play big-time college football starting in 2024, and you want to stay on the West Coast, you really only have one option, and that's USC. You want to play big-time college basketball, you really only have one option, and that's UCLA. So I don't blame those schools for wanting to have a monopoly on the entire thing and not wanting UW and Oregon to be a part of what's happening in the Big Ten. But at some point, they may have no choice because, let's face it, guys, if you're UCLA and USC, your closest road trip is Nebraska, and that's 1,500 miles away from L.A. So they may have to get to a point where they form, a little bit of a subdivision that includes potentially 2 or 3 other teams on the West Coast. Because it doesn't really hurt the football team. It hurts the Olympic sports, right? Because the football team will fly private. Like Chip Kelly told us at Media Day last week in Vegas, they take a charter bus, they pull up to the tarmac, they jump on the plane. Each player has a row to themselves, for crying out loud. If you're a softball player or a baseball player or volleyball or swimming or whatever, and you're flying coach in commercial airplanes, you're flying... If you're in L.A., you're going, sometimes 3,000 miles away to play Rutgers. Columbus, Ohio, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Lincoln, Nebraska, Penn State, Maryland, places like that. These are not easy trips unless you're flying and traveling in comfort the way the football team is.
If you don't mind, Softy, one more, and I know you have your show going up, and Paul might have a
I'm all good, man.
Now, you know, you hear about perception sometimes if you're not in the bubble, so to speak, that Pac-12 bubble, but you hear, and Paul, you had your top 5 last week about what went wrong, that do you sense that the conference is full of itself at times too much, or is it just part of a part of the Pac-12 conference?
No, I think that there's absolutely certain member institutions and certain presidents that are a tad arrogant, and I think that's what we just talked about. That you're not dealing with 12 conference presidents that are big time uber duper mega sports fans and live and breathe football. Like for example, what happened in the SEC during COVID, that would never happen here ever. I mean, look, we can sit here and debate the seriousness of COVID and vaccines and all that crap. I don't really want to get into that conversation, but if you guys want to have that conversation when I hang up, that's your prerogative. I mean, but they were literally willing to, according to some people, die to play college football, right? Like I remember when the Big Ten fought through COVID and Christine Brennan from USA Today wrote that this was the darkest day in the history of Big Ten football. Well, nobody died, as far as I know. There were no serious illnesses that led to people having long-term problems because of COVID, not that I know of so far. But that attitude that she had that day when she wrote that story is the attitude that a lot of people in this conference have, that they're a little bit dramatic. They tend to kind of take the conservative road when it comes to things like that. And I think it has been arrogant. There's no question about that. There was a point in time where they could expand to Texas and Oklahoma, and they flubbed their nose at him, maybe because of academics, things like that. So what do you want? You want to turn into the Ivy League of the West, or do you want to have multiple national champion programs in your conference in any given year? Because in some ways you can't have both, right? Not everybody can be Stanford. And oh, by the way, Stanford's football team is horrible right now. They've won 6 games in 2 years, and nobody even gives a damn down there about college football in the Bay Area. So I think there absolutely is some arrogance that's hurt this conference over the years, for sure.
I just wish one time you would actually not tell us exactly how you feel, just so we can know what it's like, man. We love you.
And you know what's funny about that Christine Brennan story? I'm sorry to ramble on here, but Rick Neuheisel does a show with us every week, and he made a great point. He said Christine Brennan wrote that article about the Big Ten, saying it was the darkest day in Big Ten history when they decided to play football during COVID. And Rick's point was, did anybody not remember Jerry Sandusky, who literally was raping kids in locker rooms at Penn State? And you're calling this the darkest day in the history of the program because there's a new virus that nobody's ever heard of before, and because they're not panicking about it the way other people are, you want to bring them down and just, act like an alarmist. So I mean, I don't know, man. Look, I mean, people have a right to act any way they want to, okay? But the SEC was literally willing to die to play college football during COVID. You saw they put 50,000 fans a game. You guys had fans in your stadiums too, in Texas and all over Oklahoma. So, the phrase, it just means more in places like where you live and the SEC. There's a reason why they say that, because it just means more. And I think in a lot of ways, it just means less on the West Coast.
Great stuff, Softy. Appreciate you, buddy. Enjoy the beautiful weather. And hopefully at some point we'll have more finality on whatever the Pac-12 does moving forward. In fact,